Power, when pushed too far, has a way of turning on itself. In Washington today, we are watching a paradox unfold in real time. A president asserting power with unprecedented boldness against allies, institutions, and long-standing norms is discovering that strength, when stripped of restraint, can become a liability. Not because his authority is weak, but because resistance is no longer quiet. From Europe to the US Senate, from courtrooms to central bankers, the pushback is growing not in dramatic revolts, but in subtle fractures. Allies hedge, institutions slow down, lawmakers hesitate, and policies designed to project dominance begin to stall under their own weight. This is not a story about ideology. It is a story about power and consequence, about how modern systems respond when one actor tries to bend every rule at once. If you want to understand where American leadership and its limits are headed next, stay with me, because to grasp what's happening now, we first need to clearly define the problem itself. And that's where we go next. At the center of this moment is a simple but dangerous shift. Power is no longer being used to navigate institutions. It is being used to override them. The administration's actions follow a clear pattern. Threats against allies replace diplomacy. Public judgments replace due process. Pressure campaigns replace institutional independence. From Greenland to the Federal Reserve, from immigration enforcement to military authority, the same logic repeats. Authority asserted first, consequences considered later. What makes this moment different is not just the scale of these moves, but their simultaneity. Foreign policy, law enforcement, monetary policy, and congressional oversight are all being tested at once. Each system is being pushed to see how much it can bend before it resists, and resistance, when it comes, rarely announces itself loudly. It appears as hesitation, as delay, as loss of trust, as quiet recalibration by allies and lawmakers who begin to prepare for a future where American power is less predictable. To understand why this strategy is producing friction instead of compliance, we need to step back and look at where this governing style comes from and why leaders under pressure so often choose it. This governing style did not appear overnight. It follows a familiar historical rhythm. When leaders feel their dominance slipping, approval softening, allies questioning, institutions slowing, they often reach for sharper tools. Not persuasion, but force. Not patience, but immediacy. Historians of authoritarianism have seen this pattern repeat across systems and eras. Pressure produces escalation. In this case, the escalation is visible in the abandonment of convention. Diplomatic norms that once managed alliances are treated as obstacles. Legal restraint, once a shield for legitimacy, becomes an inconvenience. Independent institutions, designed to stabilize the system, are reframed as adversaries. Ruth Ben-Ghiat captures this moment precisely. When autocrats sense vulnerability, unpredictability becomes a feature, not a flaw. Bold moves are meant to reassert control, to remind supporters and opponents who holds power. But modern democratic systems are not built like autocracies. They rely on trust, continuity, and cooperation across borders and branches. When those foundations are shaken too quickly, the system does not collapse, it stiffens. And that stiffness sets the stage for the first real rupture, the moment when consequences stop being theoretical and become impossible to ignore. The first rupture appears far from Washington, but its implications cut straight back to American power. When the president publicly threatens to seize Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally, the shock is not just diplomatic, it is structural, because alliances are not held together by contracts alone. They are held together by assumptions about restraint, predictability, and mutual respect. And suddenly, those assumptions are in doubt. European defense partners begin doing something quiet but consequential. They recalibrate. Business conversations drift toward China and other Asian markets. Long-standing joint innovation projects, the kind American defense contractors depend on, are no longer taken for granted. The question being asked is no longer, how do we work with the United States? But how much can we rely on it? A former Pentagon official puts it starkly. If Greenland falls into this logic, Europe may follow. Not in protest, but in preparation. This is how power erodes in the modern world. Not through dramatic exits, but through hedging, through bridges slowly being pulled up. If this dynamic surprises you, pause here. Because what looks like foreign defiance is actually the system responding rationally to uncertainty. And once that logic takes hold abroad, it rarely stays there. What ties these moments together is not impulse. It is a deeper mechanism at work. Power in complex systems is not additive. You cannot simply apply more of it and expect more control. Instead, power functions through legitimacy, the belief shared by others. That authority will be exercised within understood boundaries. When those boundaries are breached repeatedly, institutions do something subtle. They stop cooperating fully. Allies hedge instead of commit. Prosecutors become cautious instead of decisive. Central bankers close ranks instead of yielding. Each actor follows its own incentive. Protect credibility, preserve independence, avoid being absorbed into political theater. The pressure on the Federal Reserve illustrates this perfectly. By pushing Jerome Powell publicly, then allowing a criminal probe to loom over the Fed chair, the administration seeks compliance, but the effect is the opposite. Senators begin to block future nominees. Independence hardens, the path to installing a more loyal successor narrows. This is the paradox of overreach. The harder power presses, the more friction it creates. Systems designed to absorb pressure instead redirected back toward the source. And once that feedback loop begins, the next crisis is no longer external. It becomes domestic, faster, sharper, and far harder to control. The second rupture is closer to home and far more volatile. It unfolds not with tanks or treaties, but with trust. After a fatal shooting by an immigration agent, the president does something national leaders traditionally avoid. He delivers a verdict before an investigation, in public, in real time. The message is unmistakable. Due process is secondary. Loyalty comes first. But law enforcement legitimacy depends on distance between politics and prosecution, between power and judgment. When that distance collapses, institutions freeze. Investigators are no longer just gathering facts. They are defending their credibility. Communities are no longer waiting for answers. They are bracing for injustice. Former prosecutors warn of the consequence. When people stop believing investigations are impartial, closure disappears, protests linger, tensions compound, force escalates. At the same time, resistance hardens inside the president's own party. Republican senators move to limit war powers. Others vow to block Federal Reserve appointments. The response from the White House is fury calls, threats, public denunciations. But anger is not control, it is exposure. This is the moment where power meets its mirror. When pressure no longer bends institutions, it reveals their limits. And once that line is crossed, the consequences shift from political to personal for every citizen living inside the system. Now, let me bring this closer to you, because when institutions strain, it is not abstract, it is lived. If you are watching this as a citizen, what you are really seeing is uncertainty seep into daily life. When courts are questioned, you wonder whether justice will arrive late or at all. When law enforcement becomes politicized, every encounter feels heavier, more fragile. When the central bank is pressured, inflation, mortgages, and jobs stop feeling stable. And when allies begin to doubt American leadership, the cost eventually lands at home. Slower growth, fewer partnerships, less influence over the world shaping your future. You may not follow Senate votes or foreign policy debates closely. Most people don't. But you feel the effects when systems meant to protect neutrality start choosing sides. This is where frustration turns into fatigue, where civic trust erodes quietly, day by day. If this resonates with you, if you've felt that unease, pause here. Share this. Talk about it. Because understanding how power affects ordinary lives is the first step toward reclaiming agency in moments like this. And the truth is, this story does not stop at America's borders. What happens inside the United States never stays there for long. As allies recalibrate and institutions resist, the signal sent to the world is unmistakable. American power is no longer predictable, and unpredictability is contagious. In geopolitics, uncertainty does not create neutrality. It creates opportunity for others. When European defense partners quietly explore alternatives, China does not need to persuade them aggressively. It only needs to appear stable. When US credibility wavers, emerging powers gain leverage not by confrontation, but by contrast. The intervention in Venezuela exposes this dynamic clearly. The military logic may have been forceful, but the economic rationale collapses almost immediately when ExxonMobil calls the country uninvestable. That single word reverberates far beyond Caracas. It tells global markets that even American corporations are hedging against American policy. This is how influence slips, not through defeat, but through doubt. Alliances weaken, deterrence blurs. Strategic commands in Europe and the Indo-Pacific feel the strain of partners asking new questions, planning new contingencies. And once global actors start planning for a post-reliable America, the system begins to reorganize itself slowly, methodically, and without asking Washington for permission. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. Where does this path actually lead? Looking ahead, the trajectory splits into three distinct paths, not predictions, but possibilities shaped by choices already in motion. The first is restraint. In this scenario, pressure triggers recalibration. Institutions reassert boundaries. Allies receive reassurance. Power is still exercised forcefully, but within limits that preserve cooperation. The system bends but holds. This path restores some trust, not because conflicts disappear, but because rules re-emerge. The second path is drift. Here, overreach continues, but resistance remains fragmented. Allies hedge quietly. Senators obstruct selectively. Institutions slow rather than confront. Power still functions, but inefficiently leaking influence at the edges. The United States remains dominant, yet less decisive, less trusted, less able to shape outcomes it once controlled. The third path is rupture. Norms collapse faster than replacements form. Legal credibility erodes, alliances thin. Domestic politics harden into permanent confrontation. In this world, authority survives, but legitimacy does not, and systems governed by force alone become brittle. History suggests one truth. Systems rarely break all at once. They weaken gradually through miscalculation, and the direction chosen now will determine whether power stabilizes the future or accelerates its own limits. Every era of power leaves behind a lesson. This one is no different. The story unfolding now is not about one leader alone. It is about how modern systems respond when pressure replaces persuasion and dominance is mistaken for durability. Power can command compliance for a time, but only legitimacy sustains influence. What we are watching is a test not just of institutions, but of patience, of whether restraint can coexist with strength, of whether authority understands the difference between being feared and being followed. For you, as a citizen or observer, the question is not partisan, it is foundational. What kind of system do you want to live under? One that relies on force or one that functions through trust? If this analysis helped you see the pattern beneath the headlines, stay engaged, share this conversation, follow what comes next. Because the future of power is not decided in a single election or crisis. It is shaped by how often limits are respected and how quickly consequences are understood.